The year was 1874, and the wind that swept across the Arizona territory carried both dust and destiny. The land was raw and wide, a place where men carved out a living with grit, and women survived with willpower sharper than any Bowie knife. The desert bloomed with yucca and thorn, and the air shimmered with heat. To the east lay the silver line of the mountains where the Apache called home. To the west, the scattered forts of the U.S. Army stood as lonely islands of iron discipline and uneasy peace. Among the settlers who had braved the wild frontier was Clara Monroe, a young woman of 25 with sun-browned skin and eyes the color of the prairie sky after a storm. She had come from Missouri, chasing the whisper of a new beginning. The West was no place for the faint-hearted, but Clara had long since lost the luxury of fragility. Fever had taken her parents and her younger sister 2 years earlier. Their graves lay beneath the twisted oaks back east, and with nothing left but memories and grief, Clara had joined a wagon train heading west. In the small outpost of Fort Laramie, she found work as a schoolteacher. The fort was surrounded by miles of open land, golden grass that bent under the wind, rivers that glittered under the sun, and the occasional band of buffalo that still roamed free despite the soldiers' patrols. Life was hard, but Clara found solace in teaching the settlers' children. Their laughter reminded her that innocence still had a place in this harsh land. Yet behind her calm demeanor, she carried a secret that gnawed at her heart like a buried thorn. Years ago, back in Missouri, she had been thrown from a runaway horse. The doctor who tended her afterward had been kind, but his words had struck harder than the fall. "You're lucky to be alive, Miss Monroe. But the injury has changed things. You won't be able to have children." That truth had shadowed her ever since. She had once dreamed of being a mother, of holding her own baby under the morning light, but fate had closed that door. She never spoke of it, not to anyone. Who would want a woman who couldn't give him sons or daughters, in a land where families were built with sweat and survival? That truth was a brand she bore in silence. One late afternoon, as the sky bled orange and red across the plains, Clara was walking home from the schoolhouse when she noticed something on the horizon. At first it looked like smoke, thin tendrils rising from the ridge beyond the creek. Then she heard the distant cry of alarm from the watchtower at the fort. "Smoke signal. To the south ridge." Apache sign. Fear spread through the settlement like prairie fire. Doors were barred, rifles loaded, and families huddled close. The soldiers saddled up to patrol the ridge, their faces hard beneath wide-brimmed hats. Clara closed her shutters and whispered a prayer, her heart tight with the unease that always came when whispers of Apache raids swept through the camp. But that night passed without trouble, and by dawn, calm seemed to return. The smoke was gone, the air still. Clara set out for the river to gather water. The sun was just rising over the hills when she saw something that made her stop short, a trail of blood leading from the rocks to the reeds near the water's edge. Her heart leapt. Instinct told her to turn back, but curiosity and compassion rooted her to the spot. Kneeling, she parted the reeds and found him. He was a man, tall and lean, his skin bronze under the early light. His long black hair was matted with blood, and his body bore several wounds, one in his shoulder, another grazing his ribs. His chest rose shallowly, his breath ragged. But it wasn't just his wounds that froze her. It was his features. He was Apache. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to call the soldiers. But when his eyelids fluttered and he looked at her, she couldn't move. His eyes, dark, deep, and burning with both pain and pride, met hers with something that wasn't hatred nor fear. It was defiance and exhaustion. For a long moment they stared at each other. Then he groaned softly and fell back, his strength spent. Clara's hands trembled, but the schoolteacher's compassion, the same heart that soothed frightened children, rose within her. This man was wounded, hunted, dying by the river. Soldier or Apache, he was still a man in need. She made her decision. By the time the sun had fully risen, Clara had managed with great effort to drag him to her small cabin half a mile from the fort. She hid him beneath a blanket on her bed, cleaned his wounds with boiled water, and stitched what she could with trembling hands. He murmured something in his language, low and broken, and then fell into deep sleep. For the next few days, she nursed him in secret. When soldiers passed near her cabin, she told them she was ill. When the children came knocking, she said the school was closed for the week. The man's strength slowly returned. He watched her quietly as she tended him, saying little. When he finally spoke in halting English, it startled her. "My name is Taza," he said, voice rough as desert stone. Clara hesitated before replying. "Clara?" "Monroe." He nodded, his gaze steady. "You saved me. Why?" She looked down at her hands. "Because you were bleeding." "And because no one else would have." Something passed between them then, a kind of understanding that words couldn't hold. Taza told her, in fragments, that he had been ambushed by cavalry scouts while hunting near the river. He had escaped, but barely. Clara knew the risk she took keeping him there. If the soldiers discovered an Apache in her home, she'd be accused of aiding the enemy. Yet as days turned into nights, her fear slowly melted into something else. She noticed the quiet strength in him, the way he watched the world with reverence, how he thanked the earth before eating, how gently he handled her broken furniture to repair it without asking. In turn, he began to see her not as a settler woman, but as a soul who had known loss and loneliness much like himself. Still, she kept her secret close. The truth of her infertility lay buried deep in her heart. How could she speak of it to a man whose people honored family above all things? She could not bear the look of pity, or worse, rejection that would surely follow. One evening, as the desert wind whispered through the cracks in her cabin, Clara watched Taza sleeping by the hearth. The flickering firelight painted his face in shades of gold and shadow. She realized with a start that she no longer saw him as a stranger or an enemy. Somewhere between the fear and the silence, she had begun to care. Outside, the stars blazed cold and clear over the Arizona sky. Inside, the rhythm of his breathing was the only sound. Clara sat there long into the night, torn between the life she knew and the one that was silently being born within her heart. When dawn came, she stepped outside to fetch water. The desert stretched before her, wide, lonely, and endlessly beautiful. She felt, for the first time in years, that maybe God had not forgotten her after all. She turned back toward her cabin and whispered softly, "Whatever comes, I will not be afraid." And somewhere behind her, the wounded Apache stirred, already sensing that their fates, two lives from two worlds, had just become forever entwined beneath the vast, untamed sky. The desert had a rhythm of its own, a slow, patient heartbeat that pulsed beneath the sand and sage. Clara Monroe had begun to learn that rhythm. She rose each morning before the sun, fetched water from the creek, and tended to the man she had saved from death, the Apache warrior named Taza. At first, he spoke little. Silence was his shield, and Clara respected it. She knew he was watching her, measuring her as carefully as a hawk studies its prey. But over the following weeks, as his wounds began to heal and his strength returned, the silence softened into quiet understanding. When he first stood again, she saw the grace in his movements, every step deliberate, balanced the way only a man born to the wild could move. He spent long hours outside the cabin once he could walk, gazing toward the mountains as though his heart were tethered there. Clara had questions she dared not ask. What tribe was he from? How far was his village? Did he have a wife waiting for him? But she swallowed those thoughts. Her duty was only to heal him. At least that was what she told herself. Taza, too, seemed to struggle with the strangeness of their situation. He was used to the open land, to sleeping beneath the stars and speaking the tongue of his people. Now he was trapped in the home of a white woman, dependent on her kindness. Yet there was something in Clara's eyes, a stillness that reminded him of the desert after a storm. Her hands were gentle, her voice soft when she spoke. And unlike the soldiers or settlers he had known, she showed no hatred. One evening he asked her a question that caught her off guard. "Why you come here? This land, not kind to your people?" Clara hesitated. She was kneading dough by the hearth, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. The firelight touched her hair, turning it to a soft amber glow. "Because there was nothing left for me back east," she said. "My family's gone. I came looking for peace. Maybe a place to start over." Taza nodded slowly. "And you find it?" A faint, sad smile crossed her lips. "I thought I did. Until the soldiers came, until the raids. Now I'm not sure anyone has peace anymore." He understood that truth all too well. The white man's forts and fences had stolen more than land from his people. They had stolen the quiet between the winds. Over the next few days, they began to talk more. At first, their words were simple, names of things, small exchanges about the weather or her chores. He helped her repair her broken fence, mended the cracked boards on her roof, even carved a new handle for her water bucket from a piece of mesquite wood. Each act of work was a wordless offering, a bridge across the distance between them. When the evenings grew cool, they would sit outside and watch the stars. Taza told her stories in halting English, tales of Usan, the Apache creator, of how the Great Spirit shaped the mountains from his hands and scattered the stars like seeds across the sky. Clara listened, entranced, the soft glow of the fire painting both their faces in gold. In return, she read aloud from the old Bible she kept, a worn book with her mother's name on the inside cover. Though Taza did not understand every word, he listened quietly, fascinated by the sound of her voice. One night, as the fire crackled low, Clara told him about her accident, the fall from the horse back in Missouri, the injury that had taken away her ability to bear children. It was a story she had never shared with another living soul. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I'll never be able to give a man children," she said softly, staring into the flames. "And out here, that's all most men want. A strong wife, a big family. I thought it best to live alone." The silence that followed was long. She expected pity or perhaps polite discomfort. But when Taza spoke, his words came slow, steady, and sure. "Then I'll just love you more." Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. She looked up, meeting his gaze across the flickering firelight. His dark eyes held no hesitation, no judgment, only truth. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You don't know what you're saying." Taza leaned forward, the shadows carving his face into fierce, beautiful lines. "I know," he said. "A woman's heart is more than her womb. You give life with your kindness, your spirit. A man who cannot see that is blind." Clara's eyes blurred with sudden tears. No one, not one soul, had ever spoken such words to her. All the shame and loneliness she had carried for years cracked open inside her, and something new began to bloom in its place. For a moment, neither spoke. The desert night surrounded them, alive with the distant cry of a coyote. Then, almost without thought, she reached across the space between them and placed her hand on his. His fingers, warm and calloused, closed gently around hers. It was not a moment of passion, but one of recognition. Two hearts meeting on equal ground. From that night on, their connection deepened. Clara felt it in every glance, every unspoken word. When he fetched water from the creek, he always brought back wildflowers, small desert blooms pale against the red dust. When she baked bread, he'd sit nearby, watching her work with quiet fascination. One morning she found him outside, kneeling in the sand, carving something from a piece of cedar. When he finished, he handed it to her. It was a small figure, two hands clasped together, carved with delicate care. "So you don't forget," he said simply. Clara smiled through tears, clutching the figure to her chest. "I couldn't forget you if I tried, but the world outside their small refuge was not kind to love such as theirs." Rumors began to stir around the fort. Someone had seen tracks near the creek, Apache tracks. Major Harlan, the officer in charge, grew restless. He ordered daily patrols. "No savage will hide near my post," he declared. Clara felt the danger closing in like a tightening noose. Every knock at her door made her heart jump. Every shadow in the trees sent fear racing through her blood. Taza sensed it too. "They will come soon," he said one night, his voice grim. "If they find me here, they kill me and you too." Clara shook her head fiercely. "No, I won't let them." He gave a faint smile. "You cannot stop bullets with your heart, Clara." The next day, soldiers passed near the cabin again. Their leader lingered longer than usual, questioning her about noises heard near the creek. Clara lied with trembling calm, saying she'd seen only deer. The moment they left, she ran inside, breathless. Taza was packing his things, a small knife, a water skin, a length of rope. "I will go," he said. "To stay is to bring death to your door." Tears welled in her eyes. "And if you go, what am I supposed to do? Wait, wonder if you're alive?" He took her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "You will live, Clara Monroe. You have a brave heart. If it beats for me, I will find it again. That is my promise." Their lips met then, softly at first, then with all the fire they had kept buried for weeks. The kiss tasted of salt and sorrow and wild hope. When they finally broke apart, the dawn was breaking, painting the horizon with gold. Without another word, Taza slipped into the desert mist, leaving only the faint tracks of his moccasins in the sand. Clara stood at the doorway long after he vanished, her heart torn between love and loss. Behind her, the cabin was silent, but in the stillness she could almost hear his words echoing through the wind. Then I'll just love you more. And though her eyes were wet, her lips curved into the faintest smile. For the first time in years, Clara Monroe did not feel broken. She felt alive. The weeks that followed Taza's departure stretched out like a slow, aching song. Clara Monroe went through the motions of her days, teaching the children at the Fort's small schoolhouse, drawing water from the creek, tending her small garden, but the rhythm of her life felt hollow, stripped of meaning. The wind still whispered through the sage, and the sunset still painted the desert in gold, yet none of it seemed alive without him. At night, when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the rough warmth of his hands, still hear the echo of his voice saying, "Then I'll just love you more." Sometimes she would wake before dawn and imagine she heard him outside, the soft footfall of moccasins in the dust. But each time she opened the door, she found only emptiness. The soldiers had stopped questioning her, though not because they trusted her. She could feel their eyes on her whenever she passed through the fort. Major Harlan especially seemed to sense something unspoken. He was a broad-shouldered man, proud and cautious, a man who believed the world existed in two colors, blue for the army, red for the enemy. And Clara, to him, was a woman too kind for her own good. One afternoon, as she dismissed her students, Harlan appeared at the door of the schoolhouse. "Miss Monroe," he said, tipping his hat. "Might I have a word?" She nodded, hiding her unease. He stepped inside, boots thudding against the floorboards. "Strange times," he began, looking around the little classroom. "The Apaches have been quiet these past weeks. Too quiet. My scouts say there's a wounded one somewhere near the ridge, maybe dead by now, but we can't take chances." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You live near that ridge, don't you?" Clara forced a polite smile. "I do, Major, but I haven't seen anyone since the patrols last came through." He studied her face for a long moment. "I hope that's true. It would be a shame if someone were found helping one of them savages. Army wouldn't take kindly to it." The words landed heavy in the air. Clara nodded, murmured something about understanding, and watched him leave. Her hands trembled as she gathered the children's papers. The fear she had managed to bury began to claw its way back up. That night she sat on the edge of her bed, staring into the dying embers of her hearth fire. "Where are you, Taza?" she thought. "Are you safe? Do you think of me as I think of you?" But fate has its own way of answering questions. A few days later she found a small bundle left by her door, wrapped in deerskin, tied with sinew. Inside was a smooth stone painted with the image of an eagle, wings spread wide. It was Apache work, Taza's work. Her heart leapt. He was alive, and he was near. That night, as the moon rose high and white over the desert, she lit a small lantern and placed it in her window. It was their signal, a silent beacon of hope. And sure enough, before the night was over, she heard a faint knock at the back door. Clara rushed to open it, and there he was. Taza stood in the shadows, leaner than before, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes, those dark, steady eyes, still burned with the same fierce light. For a moment neither spoke. Then she threw her arms around him, trembling. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. "I could not stay away," he said softly, his voice low as thunder before rain. "You are my heart, Clara. The wind carries your name to me, even in the mountains." He had risked everything returning to her, and she, knowing the danger, could not bring herself to send him away again. For the next few weeks they lived like ghosts, two souls hidden from the world. By day, Clara went about her duties at the fort, careful to show no sign of what her nights held. By night, Taza returned to the cabin, moving silent as the wind, bringing food from his hunts and stories from the wild country beyond the ridge. They learned to speak with few words, their love expressed in quiet acts. When he came in cold from the night, she'd warm his hands between hers. When she fell asleep by the fire, he'd cover her gently with a blanket, his gaze lingering as if to memorize every breath she took. There were moments of peace so perfect they felt unreal. Nights when they'd sit outside under a sky blooming with stars, their hands entwined, the sound of coyotes calling in the distance. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills, Taza handed her a small bundle of carved figures, tiny wooden children, their faces etched with joy. "For you." he said simply. Clara turned them over in her hands, her eyes welling.
Taza, I can't.
He placed a finger gently on her lips. You can, he whispered. So your home is never without laughter. The gesture undid her. She pressed the figures to her chest and wept quietly. But happiness in the frontier was never left undisturbed. Word spread through the fort that Apache tracks had been found near the settlement. This time the signs were fresh. Major Harlan grew relentless, ordering nightly patrols. Soldiers combed the ridges with rifles ready. Clara felt the world closing in. She knew it was only a matter of time before they found Taza, or her secret. One night, as they sat together by the dying fire, Taza's expression hardened. I must go, he said. They will find me soon. Clara's heart clenched. You said that before, and I let you go once. I can't do it again. He took her hand, his thumb tracing the inside of her wrist where her pulse fluttered. If I stay, they will kill me, Clara. You must live. If I run, there is a chance for both of us. Tears streamed down her cheeks. How will I find you? How will I know where to look? Taza reached into his pouch and pulled out the stone she had once received, the painted eagle. He pressed it into her palm. Follow the eagle, he said. My people live where the eagle flies high, north in the White Mountains. When it is safe, I will send word. Outside, the sound of horses echoed faintly from the fort road. The soldiers were closer than ever. Taza looked toward the window, then back at her. I must go now. She clung to him, desperate. Please, promise me you'll come back. He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her skin. Our hearts beat the same, he whispered. As long as one beats, the other will find its way home. Then he was gone, swallowed by the night. Moments later, boots thundered up the path. Soldiers burst into her cabin, rifles raised, shouting questions she barely heard. They found nothing, only the faint smell of smoke and the echo of a closing door. When they finally left, Clara sank to her knees, the eagle stone clenched tight in her hand. She knew then that she could no longer wait for fate to bring him back. If the world had taken him to the mountains, she would follow, no matter how far or how wild the road. Outside, the wind rose over the plains, whispering his name through the night. Taza, and somewhere, carried on that same wind, another voice answered. Clara! The desert dawn came sharp and gold the morning Clara Monroe made her choice. She stood outside her small cabin, the chill of night still clinging to the air, a bundle of supplies strapped to the back of her mare, Juniper. Behind her, the world she knew, the schoolhouse, the fort, the watchful eyes of the soldiers grew smaller with every heartbeat. Ahead stretched the wide, wild land where few dared to travel alone. She had nothing but a map drawn from memory, a compass, and the stone Taza had given her, the painted eagle that seemed to catch the morning light like a sign from heaven. North, he had said. Follow the eagle. Clara took one last look at her cabin, then mounted her horse and nudged her gently forward. The wind carried the faint scent of mesquite and promise. She was heading toward the White Mountains, Apache country. The first days were the hardest. The land was merciless, a mix of dust and canyon, of scorching daylight and freezing nights. Clara rode by day and rested by small fires at dusk, her every sense on alert. She knew soldiers patrolled some trails and hostile travelers others, but her fear of what might lie ahead was smaller than her fear of living without him. Each evening, when the sun dropped low, she'd take out the carved figures Taza had given her, the wooden children, still smooth and warm from his hands. She set them by the fire, whispering prayers for his safety, for hers, and for the day their paths would cross again. Days turned to weeks. She passed through the remnants of mining towns, bartered for food with travelers, and once escaped a dust storm so fierce it nearly buried her tent in sand. The journey carved away every trace of the gentle schoolteacher she'd once been. The woman who rode north now was lean, sun-browned, and fierce-eyed, a creature born of endurance and love. It was on the 12th day that she encountered her first Apache. He appeared out of the dust like a spirit, tall, silent, his hair bound with red cloth. A bow hung at his side and his expression was unreadable. Clara froze, one hand instinctively going to her reins. The man regarded her a long while before speaking in careful English. White woman rides far from her people, why? Clara swallowed her fear and held out the eagle stone in trembling fingers. I'm looking for Taza, she said. White Mountain Apache. At the sound of the name, something flickered in the man's eyes. Recognition. He motioned for her to follow. "Come," he said simply. They rode in silence for hours through the winding trails of the foothills until the scent of pine replaced the desert's dry air. As the terrain rose, the colors changed, the dusty tans giving way to greens and golds, the landscape alive with whispering trees. Finally, as twilight began to paint the sky, they reached a small encampment nestled in a sheltered valley. Dozens of people turned to watch her arrival, men with watchful eyes, women with long braids, children peeking from behind woven blankets. Her guide dismounted and spoke quickly in Apache. Some frowned. Others murmured among themselves. Clara understood none of it, yet she felt their judgment like heat on her skin. At last, an older man stepped forward. His face was lined with age, his eyes dark and sharp as obsidian. He wore a bone pendant around his neck and carried himself with quiet authority. The others fell silent as he approached. He studied Clara from head to toe, then asked in slow English, "You are the one who saved the wounded man near the fort?" "Yes," she said softly. "His name is Taza." The old man nodded. Taza spoke of a woman, pale as moonlight, strong as mountain oak. He said she healed him when his blood was leaving him. Clara felt tears sting her eyes. "Then he's alive?" The man's lips curved slightly. "Alive, and far stronger than before. Come, you will see." He led her through the camp to a ridge overlooking a stream that glittered beneath the fading sun. There by the water stood Taza. He was bare-chested, his skin burnished by sun and wind, his hair longer than she remembered. He was helping others raise a wooden frame for what looked like a home. When he turned and saw her, the world seemed to stop. For a long, stunned heartbeat, neither moved. Then Taza dropped the beam he was holding and began to run. Clara's breath caught. She dismounted and met him halfway, her steps unsteady until his arms closed around her, strong and certain. The moment they touched, all the fear and exhaustion of her journey melted away. "I thought you were a dream," she whispered against his chest. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his dark eyes soft. "You came," he said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "I told you I would," she murmured. "No matter how far." Around them, whispers rippled through the camp, but neither cared. For that one perfect moment, the vastness of the West, the boundaries of race and war, all seemed to vanish. There was only the sound of the river, the warmth of his hand in hers, and the steady beat of two hearts finding home. That night, the tribe held a small feast in her honor. The air smelled of roasted corn and pine smoke, the sound of drums echoing against the canyon walls. Clara sat beside Taza, watching the flicker of firelight on his face, marveling that fate had brought her here. The old man who had welcomed her, the chief she now learned, spoke solemnly. "You have crossed much land to find this man," he said. "Few women would risk so much for love. You are welcome among us if you wish to stay." Clara looked at Taza, her heart steady. "I wish to stay," she said. A murmur of approval moved through the crowd. The chief nodded and raised his hands. "Then it shall be so. Tomorrow at dawn, we will bless your union under the sun and river. The land will remember." At sunrise, they stood together beside the stream, surrounded by the people of the White Mountain Apache. Clara wore a dress made of soft buckskin, fringed with beads that caught the light. Taza wore a single eagle feather in his hair. The air was still, as though even the earth held its breath. The chief spoke words in Apache, his voice deep and rhythmic, then placed his hands upon theirs. "The river flows between two mountains," he said. "Different, yet joined forever by the same water. So too are your hearts." Taza turned to her, his hand steady in hers. "When I first saw you," he said softly, "you were light in a place of death. You healed me with your hands, but it was your heart that saved me. I am yours, Clara, always." Tears glistened in her eyes. "And you," she whispered. "You taught me that love is not what the world allows, it's what two souls choose to build, no matter the cost." When he kissed her, the valley erupted in song, drums, voices, the laughter of children. The air shimmered with smoke and sunlight. For the first time in her life, Clara felt whole. She had come to the ends of the earth and found something worth every mile of loneliness, a home not made of walls or blood, but of belonging. That night, as they lay beneath the vast starlit sky, Taza brushed a hand over her hair and said, "You are of two worlds now, but you belong to one heart." Clara smiled. tracing the lines of his face with her fingers. "And that heart," she whispered, "beats beside mine." The sound of the river was soft, the wind gentle through the pines, and for the first time in years, Clara Monroe slept without fear, because love had not only found her, it had claimed her, across every boundary the world could draw. The morning after their union, the valley stirred to life under a wash of pale gold light. Smoke rose lazily from the cooking fires. Children's laughter echoed among the pines, and the scent of earth and cedar hung in the air. Clara awoke to the sound of Taza chopping wood outside their small lodge, a simple home of willow and hide that they had built together beside the stream. For a moment, she lay there, the woven blanket warm against her skin, and watched him through the open flap of the lodge. The way he moved, steady, strong, graceful as the wind itself, made her heart ache with quiet joy. She thought of the woman she used to be, the schoolteacher from Missouri, prim and cautious, afraid to speak too loudly. That woman had died somewhere along the trail north. The woman who remained had been reborn among the mountains, under open skies and in the arms of a man who had taught her what love truly meant. When Taza stepped back inside, his smile was soft, but knowing. "You're watching me again," he teased gently, setting down the bundle of wood. Clara laughed. "And you're pretending not to notice." He crossed to her and kissed her forehead. "You are light in my mornings," he murmured. "The spirits were kind to bring you here." She rested her hand against his chest, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "You said once you would love me more if I couldn't give you children," she whispered. "Do you still mean it?" Taza smiled faintly, as though she had spoken of something sacred. "A woman's worth is not her womb," he said. "It is her courage, her spirit, her love. The land gives many kinds of blessings, and not all grow from seed." Those words sank deep into her soul. For years, Clara had carried the silent ache of knowing she would never bear a child. Doctors had told her so when she was 19. It had been a wound she hid behind polite smiles and careful distance, a reason she'd refused suitors and closed her heart. But here, in this wild place, the wound no longer felt like shame. It felt like a test she had survived. As the months passed, Clara became part of the life of the Apache village. She helped grind corn with the women, learned to tan hides, and even taught the children a few English words. The little ones adored her, especially a boy named Kose, whose mother had died the previous winter. He followed Clara everywhere, bright-eyed and mischievous, eager to learn. One evening, while the sun bled crimson over the peaks, Kose brought her a small bird's nest he had found fallen from a tree. Inside were 3 tiny eggs, cool to the touch. "They fell," he said softly, his broken English carrying both sorrow and wonder. "No mama now." Clara cupped the nest carefully, her throat tight. "Then we will keep them warm," she said. That night they set the nest near the fire, watching over it as if it held something precious. The next morning one of the eggs cracked, and out came a frail, trembling chick, its heartbeat so faint she could feel it through her palm. Kose clapped with joy, and Clara smiled through tears. When Taza returned from hunting, she showed him the tiny bird and the boy's proud grin. "He saved it," she said. Taza knelt beside them and ruffled Kose's hair. "A brave heart," he said. "The spirits see this." Then his gaze met Clara's, deep and knowing. A mother's heart does not need birth, only love. She understood then that fate had given her a child, not of blood, but of choice. From that day forward, Kose stayed with them, sleeping near their fire, learning from Taza and listening to Clara's stories of faraway lands. The boy's laughter filled their days, his presence softening the edges of their world. Yet not all was peace beyond their valley. Word reached them that soldiers had begun pushing deeper into Apache lands, seeking gold and claiming territory in the name of the U.S. government. Camps were burned, families scattered. One cold dawn, a rider came bearing news. A patrol of soldiers was moving through the White Mountains, led by the same captain who had once hunted Taza. Clara's heart seized. "He's coming here," she said, fear knotting her stomach. Taza's expression hardened. "He will not harm us. This is our home." But she knew the captain's kind. Men who saw natives as obstacles, not people. She had seen it before, the cold hatred behind polite uniforms. That night she could not sleep. The thought of soldiers marching into their valley, of Kose taken or Taza shot, filled her with quiet fury. She had not come all this way to lose him again. When dawn came, she rode to the edge of the canyon where the trail narrowed. From there, she could see the distant dust of riders. Her hands trembled on the reins, but her eyes were steady. She waited until they drew near, her figure alone against the rising sun. The captain, recognizing her face, reined his horse hard. "Miss Monroe," he said, astonished. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" Clara sat tall in the saddle. "Living." As a free woman, his gaze darkened. "You're living among them? You realize what they are?" "I know exactly what they are," she replied coldly. "They are people, families, protecting what's theirs." "You do the same," he scoffed. "That savage lover of yours turned your head. You can still come back, Clara. You don't belong here." She looked past him toward the horizon where Taza's people lived, where her heart had taken root. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "I belong exactly where love found me." Before he could answer, the sound of galloping hooves filled the air. Taza and several Apache warriors appeared, bows drawn but not aimed. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Clara raised her voice, clear and calm. "There's no need for blood," she said. "The war in your heart can end here, Captain. Let it." Perhaps it was the conviction in her tone or the presence of a woman standing fearless between two worlds. But the captain hesitated. His hand dropped from his gun. After a long silence, he spoke. "We'll move around your valley," he said finally, his voice gruff. "But mark my words, this peace won't last." "Peace lasts," she said, "when people believe it can." And then they were gone, their figures swallowed by the dust and distance. When Clara returned to the village, Taza met her at the stream. "You faced them alone?" he asked, both awe and anger in his tone. "I did," she said, "because love isn't something you hide behind. It's something you protect." He stared at her for a long moment, then smiled, a slow, proud smile that melted into tenderness. "You have more fire than the sun," he said. "And that fire saved us all." She laughed softly and reached for his hand. "No," she whispered. "Love did, years past." The valley remained untouched by war, its people living in quiet harmony. Clara and Taza grew older together, their days filled with laughter, stories, and the rhythm of the land. Kose grew tall and strong, a bridge between two worlds, fluent in both English and Apache, teaching peace to those willing to listen. On warm summer evenings, the three of them would sit by the riverbank, watching the stars rise. Taza would carve small wooden figures, birds, horses, children, and place them beside Clara, who would smile and whisper, "You've given me more than I ever dreamed," and he would answer, as he always had, "Then I'll just love you more." In the quiet hum of crickets and river wind, their hearts beat together, proof that love needs no bloodline, no name, no nation, only the courage to choose it again and again beneath the endless, forgiving sky of the West.